Okay. All right. So let's get this party started. Welcome everyone to the 2021 second annual Educolor Summit. Um, I'll keep it New York. It's your boy Jose Wilson in the building. No, real talk. My name is Jose Wilson. I'm the executive director of Educolor. I am so thankful for everyone coming through. Please use the chat window to give shout outs to yourselves first and foremost. And, secondly, we're really here in community and trying to build something. But so something that occurs to me is that this is the second annual summit. And it's happened a bunch of years, but it's the second time that it's been open to the general public. And it's something we've dreamed about forever and a day. And then something else that occurs to me is that I'm going to be doing as little talking as possible throughout these next few hours that we're with each other. But know that it's not just me that's going to be talking. I'll put it to you this way. We have a strong team that's been in the background and the forefront of the work for quite some time, and it's gotten us to this moment. So, of course, I want to give a shout out to Yamil Baez, Julio Torres, and, of course, you can see in the background, Hema Kodai, Jody Friedman, any number of people. I'm thinking about doing a Suku as well, Educolor NYC fam, all throughout. And, of course, all of our OGs, including Khalila Harris, Sheehan Barrett, Sabrina Stevens. I'm thinking about all the folks who've gotten us to this point. Of course, all our wonderful funders, including Cabral Co., News Literacy Corps, Greater Than Five, and the Expectations Project. So generally speaking, we have squad. And it's an amazing thing to say because, we're at a moment in time when, this so-called critical race theory has so many of us on the defensive. But I believe in us. And that's why tomorrow there will be more of us. We have to assume that the work that we're doing right now, we're going to step into it boldly, without fear, without that sense that we don't have each other, because we really do have each other. Even as we close those doors in the classroom, we fully recognize that the power that we have amongst this community, wherever two or more of us are gathered, we are together, we are in solidarity, we are in unity. There's so many folks who are doing great work out there too. And of course, you're going to hear from about anywhere between 16 to 25 folks, if I'm not mistaken, today, who are going to elevate their own work. And through their voices, you will hear mine. And I'm expecting fully that everyone's going to enjoy today, but more importantly, that you're going to take the messages that everybody has today to the places where they're going to have their influence, whether you are in the classroom, you're in that boardroom, you're in the union space, wherever you are. If you're at the university level as well, I fully expect you to carry these messages of hope, of activism, of pushing back. We're going to make some really good trouble today. And and of course, this is why we have our first keynote speaker. Mind you, last year we had the wonderful presence of Renee Moore to kick us off last year, and she brought some words of wisdom that I wanted everyone to carry, and I think that happened, right? That truly did happen. And so this year I am, oh my God, I'm so ecstatic. Like, I can't tell you how ecstatic I am to have Dr. Deetra Price Dennis of I was gonna say of Columbia University, but really, she's just a homie. Like, y'all need to know who she is. So, of course, in the way of introduction, Deetra Price Dennis is an associate professor of education in the Department of Mathematics, Science, and Technology at Teachers College, Columbia University, in the Communications, Media, Learning Technologies, and Design program. Deetra serves as co-director of the Reimagining Education Online Advanced Certificate Program and is the founding director of #JustLit, a media-based project that seeks to provide multimodal resources about literature, media, and social change in education. Her scholarship draws on ethnographic and sociocultural lenses to examine the intersections of literacy, education, technology, and curriculum development as a means to identify and amplify equity-oriented pedagogies in K-8 classrooms. Y'all should also know that there is a book that she's come out with, a fantastic book with Yolanda C. Ruiz, discussing advanced literacies. I really want y'all to hear today, though, the wonderful words that Deetra has for us today. And Deidre, you're going to be amazing. Thank you so much for coming through. This is EduColor. Let's get it.
Wow, thank you so much. I want to give you a hand. I would give a shout out to Jose. Show him some love in the chat. I am so excited to be here, and I wanted to say thank you all so much for joining us. I know it's a Friday. There are a million things going on, and I really appreciate the energy already in the chat, and I just appreciate your presence here today. When Jose, I want to take 1 second and say thank you also to the leadership team for EduColor for this incredible invitation. And so I want to use my time today really to think about this question from my perspective, but I also want to pose it to you. Who has set this table? And this poem or this question was inspired by a collection of poems in a book called Brown Honey and Broomweed Tea. Now, this is kind of old school, so you could drop something in the chat if you know this book. The book is by Joyce Carol Thomas, and it is illustrated by the incomparable late Floyd Cooper, which of course I probably didn't have to tell you because you already know by his incredible, gorgeous illustrations, his work without needing to always say who it is. But this poem serves as inspiration for the talk. And so I just want to take a second and read the poem, the namesake of the book, to you and talk a little bit more about some lessons I've learned from this poem. Brown Honey and Broomweed Tea. My mother says I am brown honey and broomweed tea. My father calls me the sweet water of his days. Yet they warn there are those who have brewed a bitter potion for children kissed long by the sun. Therefore, I approach the cup slowly, but first I ask, who has set this table? The last line of that poem, who has set this table, has been rattling around in my brain since the first time I read this poem in 1998 when I was taking a course with Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop at Ohio State University. And when Jose reached out to me for the summit, I knew there's a reason why this poem and that particular line keeps coming up over and over again for me to think about. And I knew this was the space. I knew I would be among family. I knew I would be among people who I could talk, share these ideas with, that would understand it and would also think about what this could actually mean for the work that we do as we move forward collectively. Because when I think about how we can be more intentional and deliberate, particularly given that tomorrow there will be more of us, I want the tables that we set for people to really be grounded in the ideologies that will advance all of us. And so those questions, that question, who has set this table, is something I want to think with you about today. But before I get started, I think it's important to kind of give you a sense of who I am, because I am in some ways setting a table right now that I'm inviting you to think with me at. And it's important for you to ask, like, who is this chick, right? So there are lots of things in our introduction that speak about the work that we do, but sometimes what's missing, and as we evolve, these images also evolve, is the people behind the scenes, the people from our families, our ancestors, the thought leaders, the civic leaders, people who have fought for human rights, the abolitionists, all of the folks that you see represented, and so many more that you don't, who have influenced me. I started out in West Virginia. I am Black Afro-Latin. I am from the hills of West Virginia, very proudly to say that. And my grandmother and my father and my other grandmother, who isn't pictured right now, and my children really were my entry into this work and why I care so deeply about issues related to equity, to access, to freedom, to liberation, to dreaming, to creativity, all of those things. There wasn't a time when I was a child that I didn't see my father and my grandmother huddled around the table, working on some speech for something. They were always doing something, or there was always a neighbor stopping by to holler at one of my family members about something that they needed to address in the community. And having community and thinking about community was so influential and so important in my life. I took it for granted. It wasn't something that I thought I needed to name at any point in time because it just seemed like water and air to me. It was just the thing that you did. But as I moved into education, and in so many ways, unlearned the need for community because the schooling that I received in undergrad and grad wasn't rooted in community ways of knowing. It wasn't rooted in ways that my ancestors knew to be. And it took me a long time to come back to understanding why I do what I do and how it is grounded in the world that I lived in as a child and that I just assumed everyone else lived in too. And one thing about that world that really propels the work that I do when I'm working with young folks in schools and out of schools as well, is that I felt so loved, so cared for, and so supported. I felt like the sky was the limit as a child. There was nothing that any of the adults in my life did not believe that I could accomplish. And I didn't know anything else until the first time I stepped into a school as a teacher and heard teachers speaking about children in ways that were counter to anything that I knew. So it's important for me to really ground and let you know that the way that I experience school, the way I experience life, the way I experience community really pushes forward an agenda for me to think about what type of table am I going to set when there are more of us tomorrow? Who will be at that table with me? How will we be in community and conversation? How will we share our common goals? How will we work towards making sure that everyone has access to equitable education, but just what they need in life as human beings? So that brings me to the question, who am I setting the table for? And there are a few thought leaders that I am going to kind of walk through this question with. And I'd love to hear for some of you in the chat. I can't see it at the moment, but I'd love to hear who are some of the thought leaders that help you think about who you're setting tables for. Because again, the goal is for us to be deliberate and intentional when there are more of us. And I'm so excited to even think about what that means every single day. I remember being the only Black girl in my pre-service teacher program. And in multiple schools I worked in, the only Black teacher, one school, the only Black, adult, and person over 18 years old in the building, in the history of the building. And you can only imagine how that went. So it excites me to think about what will happen when there are more of us. And it also means there's such a responsibility to think about what we're doing for each other when that happens. So I am setting the table for people who want to think radically. And I'm drawing on Ella Baker here for so many reasons. I could probably spend the whole time talking about Ella Baker on the slide. But most importantly, I want to think about Ella Baker because for her, she's saying if the system isn't working, it needs to be radically changed. And in order for it to be radically changed, we need to have a radically honest conversation about what's getting in the way of meeting the needs of the people in the system. So when I set my table, and I'll set a bunch of them, I want to be in conversation with people who want to think and dream and share and ideate and try things out and then see how it goes and then come back and share and dream and ideate and go back and forth until we start to build small moments of disruptions in systems that aren't working that actually serve as a collective to create a different infrastructure and a different vision for a system that can work for everyone. I think of these radical moments as small changes and small steps, but it also means being honest about what is the economy of the space that you're in. Does that economy serve everyone? Does it serve you? Who's left out? Who's marginalized? Who's making the decisions to keep that economy going? And what types of disruptions are necessary to reveal sometimes that economy if it's cloaked, and also to dismantle it? And, for me, in my particular position in the academy, the economy is publications. The economy is grants. The economy is staying in your office, staying in your building, and theorizing and speaking out to the masses from this high perch in the ivory tower. And for me, the small disruptions that I could take would look like not writing in journals just for other researchers, writing in journals with the people I want to be in conversation with, writing in journals that are mostly read by teachers, writing in spaces that are mostly consumed by the public, not writing for publication every single thing that I do, because all of the work that I do in schools and with teachers and with youth isn't for the economy of the academy. It has a larger goal. And so that's a small disruption. Making the decision who to publish for is a small disruption. Teaching my courses in schools to leverage the resources of the university in underserved communities is a small disruption. But what I'm thinking, writing with my teachers, or not writing my teachers, writing with teachers that I work with, writing with doctoral students that I work with, writing with students that are about to graduate from their pre-service teacher program and enter into the profession for the first time. These are very small disruptions. They're small steps to the economy of the space that I'm in. And I'm inviting you to think about what are the small steps that you can take so that when we collectively sit at this table and think about what does it mean to radically overhaul the system, we could bring all these examples with us and really figure out a new infrastructure, a new way to do this work. I'm also setting the table for folks who want to think about innovation. Innovation, not so much in the fact that it has to be tied to technology. I know I'm in a math, science, and technology department, but innovation in the fact that we recognize that the tools and the discourse that we have are not serving us, are not serving our children. And in many ways, we have new discourse floating around, learning loss, right? All of these things are not built on the potential and on the brilliance, or as my sister Goldie would say, the genius that our students bring with them into the classroom. So how do we move away from using tools to dismantle a system that the tools built, right? We don't want to use the same tools. And if we look back to what our mothers and our grandmothers and our great-grandmothers and our great-grandfathers did, they didn't always, actually very rarely in my situation, use the tools of the system to change the system. So we have roadmaps of what we can do and how we can think a little bit differently about that. But I want to set a table for people who want to be in that conversation. And for me, that has looked like creating this Just Lit project for classroom teachers, for graduate students at my university through another lab, the Media and Social Change Lab, so that I can be in conversation with people who want to dream bigger than what the system currently allows or promotes, and who wants to think about ways to be in conversations with community and with educators in ways that uplift everyone's knowledge, not in the traditional hierarchy. And that's really important for me and for what I think I needed when I was a classroom teacher. How do we create communities that aren't rooted in hierarchy, but that are also, but that are really focused on dismantling the system that doesn't allow everyone to grow and be who they can become or want to become in the world. I'm also thinking about ways to create tables and set tables that decenter whiteness. Toni Morrison has been such a guide for me in this work. Since even before I read Playing in the Dark, but absolutely cemented after I read Playing in the Dark. And so many reasons why, but the most part is really recognizing how we get caught up in trying to prove something to other people based on the fact that they are rooting their ideas of who we are and who we can become in a system that says we aren't even really human. And we can spend our time chasing our tail, trying to prove that we are worthy, or we could let that go and just stand in our glory. And what I love about Toni Morrison's quote is that there's always going to be one more thing. And every single time we drop the work that we need to do and chase the red herring, we're moving away from the work that could actually get us to where we want to be. And sometimes that looks like, the things that we say to each other, if we're going to be real. I can remember having so many conversations with other people of color, and sometimes a lot of these conversations have happened with Black women, where the things that I may be interested in want to do or want to experience in the world, are seen as things that only white people can do. And I remember one time asking my dad, why do white people get to have all the fun? I don't understand. Because when I would say, I want to go, excuse me, snowboarding, or I want to learn how to scuba dive, or yeah, I want to, go skiing or whatever it is, that for me, I'm an adrenaline junkie. So those things are really fun for me. I would always be kind of met with, sometimes depending on who's in the conversation with, oh, that's for white people. Why are you going whitewater rafting? That's for white people. And I never understood how the things that felt so free to me, things that I thought could also spark my imagination, that could let me experience something different, was always connected to whiteness. And why we took the opportunities away that we could have to explore the world and name the world and grow different ideas about that experience in the world for white people. It baffles me. Even what we see kids reading. So those types of comments were always floating around in the community in ways that I never really understood. And I do believe, and still sometimes hear them seep into educational spaces, about who gets to be in a particular space, who has access to particular types of learning experiences, who deserves access to those types of learning experiences. And when we start to disaggregate who is in that community, we clearly see that sometimes the children that we think should be able to use any tool available in the room to create, to imagine, to dream, they don't look like me. And that discourse of always centering whiteness in a way that we're responding to it, we're concerned about how it will look, or we think that certain things are only for certain people, does a disservice for us. And so I want to set tables and have conversations with people where we're not doing that type of work. And a recent experience is even at my own institution. I believe last year around this time, there was a conversation about creating an affinity space. And I'm sure you're probably thinking, you all don't already have that? We didn't. And the conversation, I ended up leaving the conversation early because there was a segment of the discussion on Zoom where people were like, well, if we create a space that's only for Black and brown people, what are other folks going to say? What are white people going to say? Is this going to be okay? And I thought, we can't keep doing this, not to each other. And we can't keep allowing that way of thinking to keep us from moving forward. And one other way that I've experienced it this year has been in having conversations about equity in schools with, teachers and with administrators. So often when I'm using words like white supremacy, I will hear things like, well, if you use that language, if you say white supremacy, it's going to offend some of the white teachers. And we don't want them to be offended by hearing the word white supremacy. And I always pause. And I didn't have a way to respond immediately. I always had to think about it for a while. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But after I thought about it, my response became really quickly, well, how offensive is racism? How offensive is racial trauma and racial violence? Is that okay? Do we want people to experience that? And then, well, I'll give you one more example. One other recent example was in a conversation on a panel that I had probably 3 or 4 days ago. At the end of the conversation, we were talking about the CRT debate, and the comment was made that, the parents who don't want their kids to engage in this, they just want what's best for their child. They're very nervous that their child is going to be centered out and made to feel bad. And I thought, well, yeah, Black and brown children are also pulled out and centered and made to feel bad when they're asked to be in scenarios playing slave catcher, where they're the slave or the enslaved person during recess, which we've seen lots of examples of that. Or there are these simulations that are happening in classrooms where we're asking students to take on roles where we are reinforcing their lack of humanity, where we're cutting Black and brown children's hair at wrestling matches, at softball matches. this is happening to us too. And yet no one seemed to care about the fact that we didn't want our children to have these experiences. So now, you know, there's this concern. And so it's very easy to see, and I'm sure you all can drop a million ideas in the chat about what you've experienced with it. But my point is, I want to be honest about all the spaces it shows up in my life, and so that we can start to be honest about how it trickles in, and sometimes in ways that feel very benign that we don't even notice it. But it's there and it impacts the work that we're able to do. I want to give a couple of other examples. One thing that I've been thinking about and could not name so eloquently as James Baldwin did, I saw this tweet years ago and I thought, oh my goodness, this is the thing. How can we create ourselves or even something for ourselves without finding it necessary to create an enemy? And I think when we start to live and teach and learn and grow and love in ways that doesn't center whiteness, we are actually doing that. We are actually finding a way to create ourselves without finding it necessary to create an enemy. And so I've tried to set tables with people, sometimes tables for two, where we can think and dream with this work. And Jose had mentioned one of the artifacts that came out of that, which is this book, Advancing Racial Literacies in Teacher Education, with my colleague and sister, Yolanda Celia Ruiz. But it's also in the book, Black Girl Literacies, that's edited by another beautiful colleague and sister, Goldie Muhammad, that came out last month, I think. I should know these things better. But my point is, there is a way to think about who we are and who we want to be in the world that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to create an enemy, that we could just stand in our own brilliance and our own joy, and all of the things that allow us to move forward in the trajectories that we've set for ourselves, that our families have set for us, and if we're honest, that our ancestors have set for us. My grandmother was dreaming about my life while I was still in my mother's womb, right? Dreaming about the life I could have, about all the things that could be possible for me before I was even here on the planet taking my first breath. So there's a way for us to capture that, to capture those dreams, to capture those possibilities without centering whiteness. And these books, I believe, are an attempt to engage in that type of conversation. I'm also super inspired and moved by the work that I've seen in UNC Chapel Hill. It's so interesting how such a horrible reminder of systemic and institutional racism, sometimes it takes that for people to come together. And so the way that the community at UNC Chapel Hill came together in solidarity around Nikole Hannah-Jones really made me realize how important it is to be intentional about setting a table for people who want to be in solidarity. I think that is one of the biggest lessons that I've learned, because so often we hear people say after the situation has passed, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. I'm so sorry that they did this to you. You didn't deserve that. I wish it didn't happen to you. I'm sure there are many of you right now on this call who have had that said to you after you've been in a meeting and other people have watched you experience racism. Say nothing during the experience, but after, text message, email you, DM you, I don't know, send an owl to your house, something. I'm so sorry that that happened to you. Instead of recognizing that that moment white supremacy shows up, it's happening to all of us because it's a system. It's not happening to one person. And oh yes, in this situation, it was directed at Nikole Hannah-Jones, but it was really happening to everyone. Everyone was feeling that experience, and everyone had a collective responsibility, a moral, ethical responsibility to speak up, to stand up, to say something, to let it be known that they don't want to be a part of that system, that they see that system, that they're disrupting that system. And I think for me, I want to be in conversation. I want to be sitting at tables with people who want to do that type of work, because it's so difficult to get that phone call or that text message after the situation when what you needed was solidarity in the moment. And as I move forward, and especially as I think about there being more of us, I don't want any of us to ever be in a situation where we feel alone, when we feel like we're alone when we're being attacked, that we need to know what it looks like. And it can look lots of different ways, which is why the table will be large. I want to have a big conversation about this so we can be really clear and intentional about how we show up for each other. What does that look like? And yes, it can also look like emails and phone calls after, but it needs to look like something during. The disruption needs to happen collectively during the moment, in the moment, right after the moment, the day after the moment, right? Weeks after the moment, months after the moment. It needs to continue to press forward so that the severity of what happened is never lost. And it's never, ever the burden of the person who experienced it to carry alone. And that really, really, really spoke to me. Now, I know I'm talking about, who I'm setting the table for, but there's a line in the poem, a couple lines in the poem I want to go back to for a second, where the author says, there's a caution that's been given to the child, right? Yet they warn there are those who have brewed a bitter potion for children kissed long by the sun. Then the caution happens. Therefore, I approach the cup slowly, and then the question. But first I ask, who has set this table? And so although I have shared lessons about the tables that I want to set for people, I also think I would be remiss if I didn't share with you what happened when I didn't approach the cup slowly. What happened when I just accepted any invitation to sit at any table? Because things happen. And if I took a moment to think about something my grandmother told me, and if any of you are from the South, actually, I don't even think this is just from being from the South, but I know for me, the one thing I was told at every church function, every picnic, every cookout, any school function, is you cannot eat everybody's potato salad. And when I went to make a plate for my grandmother, she needed to look at the dishes before I made her plate to let me know which dish I can get the potato salad out of. And that might take 20 to 30 minutes of investigation behind the scenes, but it was very clear that it can only come from a particular dish because Miss So-and-so made it. And so that lesson could also have informed some of the things that I experienced by not approaching the cup slowly, by not asking who has set the table, and by sitting and experiencing things. But I also think that that's important for us to learn. And I'm sure many of you have also thought about what that looks like when you might not have had taken that caution and asked that question before having a seat. So I'm not going to play this, but I'm going to invite you to listen to False Prophets by J. Cole. It came out years ago. And one of the things he says in throughout the whole song is just brilliant. But one of the things he says in that very first line is that there was a person that he admired so much, and that exterior of who he thought that person was shattered. And you start to find out, like, man, all the things you wrote inspire me, but you're not really the things that you wrote. All of the things that you said have inspired me and made me want to do this thing called rap, in his case, right? But you didn't even write those rhymes. So I'm finding out that I have been idolizing someone, and this person is not who they have set themselves to be. And that is one of the lessons that I have had to learn when I didn't ask that question, when I sat at any table, when I allowed myself to follow, right? To not only to move beyond being inspired, but to really thinking about elevating a person in such a way that I lost sight of what happens when you don't ask those questions, when you don't take that caution. And those can be really harmful experiences, particularly when it's us, right? When we are sitting at the table with people that are all about love and sisterhood, but you get at the table and you realize it's a very isolating space. It doesn't feel the way it felt when you read their work. So beware of those false prophets. And if you haven't heard the song from J. Cole, you want to revisit it. Even if you have heard it, revisit it. it's so beautiful for so many reasons. The other thing I've learned is, I love Nini. Y'all show Nini some love. This is the best example I could think of this, is that sometimes we show up and sit at tables with people that we think are in support of our ideas, of our life, of our friendship. And we find out that is not the case, that there is competition that's driving their invitation for you to sit at the table, and that you're coming to the table thinking one thing, and you get to the table and you slowly start to find out, maybe after several meals, oh, this isn't what I thought it was. As a matter of fact, this feels pretty hostile. I don't feel like my ideas are safe here. I'm starting to see things that I've said showing up in papers that other people have written. I'm starting to see ideas that I've talked about, being credited to other people publicly. So other things are happening at this table. And this clip, if any of you watched I'm sure some of you have, if you watched the clip, Nini's going to visit Kenya, and she's just, as soon as she gets out gets out the car, she's like, ooh, child, the ghetto. And then the white refrigerator, all of this happens from this moment of Nini visiting Kenya in order to support her. But we watch, this other, narrative kind of play out. And that has happened so many times. And so I just want to say that has happened to me as well. And as we are thinking about what it looks like when there are more of us tomorrow, making sure that we are in spaces where people are thinking about how to be in relation, how to be in community, and not how to be in and promote competition with each other in ways that is destructive and hurtful for our community. And of course, there's always the time to learn from people when you are at the table who are really interested in power and not purpose. And those lessons of not approaching the cup slowly, not asking who is at the table, being so happy to be asked to be at the table, not recognizing the chess game that was going on. And I think one of the things that I'm so cautious of when I'm mentoring new scholars, new teachers, is how to focus on our purpose together. How do we grow our purpose when it doesn't have to be the same, when we can have very different interests, but how do we focus on our individual purposes, our collective purpose? What does that look like, where we try to be really intentional about disrupting power dynamics that create marginalization in our community? And so that was a lesson to learn. There are some tables that you will be invited to where people are very interested in power and not at all interested in purpose. And how, when we set our table, do we make sure we are intentional about not falling into that trap? So I'm going to end, and hopefully we have a little bit of time for conversation about thinking really about, if there are more of us tomorrow, what kind of tables can we set where people feel welcome, where they feel invited to dream and to believe that their ideas can take root and can shift and change circumstances, not only for themselves, but for the students and for the communities that they are in conversation with, always working in solidarity with, always being an ally with. What does that look like? And I have to go back as I end to the Combahee River collective statement. And if you haven't read the statement in the entirety, I invite you to do so. Because there's this moment in the statement where, if we think about setting tables where people who have intersecting identities that overlap with systems of oppression, if we think about setting a table that's liberating for those folks, then everyone can feel more free. Our students, their families, us, our administrators, our school boards, the people in our community, right? So if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. And so when I keep dreaming about these tables that I'm setting and tables that I am more than happy to accept invitations to be set at, to be in conversation with, I want this to be the heart of it. I want us to think about, and I hope you can hear a little bit of this, turn it down a second. So much of Beyonce's song really speaks to, for me, what is at the backbone of this work. How do we let people live the lives they need to lead to really achieve what they want to achieve in our life? So thank you so much for the opportunity to be in conversation with you, to set this table with you, and to invite you to think with me about it.
Woo! Dang, everybody, please give it up for the fabulous Dr. Dietra Price-Dennis. I am going to invite everybody to pop in some questions in the chat. I know there's always a little lag time between the chat and what my video is, so I'm going to let y'all breathe on that. I'm also going to elevate a question. And Dietra knows I'm good with the questions that, you know, I just throw a lob and she hits a home run, right? So my question to you is, given your sphere of influence, and I mean that to say, like, you know, where you work, who you're working with, so on and so forth. What are some potential red flags for a lot of folks who are talking about anti-racism? I know you talked a lot about, like, you know, what power looks like, what culture looks like. So when you interact with any number of people, like, what are some red flags that you would hope people would pay attention to as they move about the work? And you know, and you can name it however you want to name it too, because you've had several names for these things in your own work.
I love that question. I just want to take a step back from that question and say, a couple of years ago, I was at a conference. And I don't remember the whole title. And if y'all know me, y'all know I mess up titles all the time, so I apologize. I'm going to assume nobody in this space was a part of that title, but if you were, just bear with me. It said something like woke literacy, something, something, something. And I was like, let me see what this is about. And I looked at the names and I was like, wow. So y'all can do woke literacy. Y'all have not talked about woke, race, equity, liberation, fighting. You haven't talked about anything your whole career, not one page in one book, in one article, your whole career, but you have a session in a ballroom about woke literacy. Like, it was crazy to me. So one of the red flags I always look for is, so is this new? Are you new to this or true to this, right? Like, is this the first time you are talking about this thing because it seems to be the thing? Or is this really the work that you're doing? And I try to listen for that, because I feel like people's discourse betrays them immediately. You know, red flags are hearing people say stuff like minority, like, no, we're not going to use minority in 2021. We're not going to do that in the same era that Michael B. Jordan breathes. We're not going to do that in 2021, right? So those are things that we won't do. We need to be better and elevate. When I hear people not recognize, you know, different ways that systems of oppression keep us from talking about issues that impact everybody, when I hear people not respecting pronouns, when I hear people not respecting, you know, it could be a whole list of things, right? But it's just the notion that when we take someone's life and try to reduce it to something that's a single issue, or we blow it off, or we use words like political correctness, or I don't want to offend you, or that might be offensive to other people. I don't know. I can keep naming like things I feel like I have run into this year, or when it's just super performative. Like when I get emails, when I think about the things that have transpired, and I can only speak right now about my context. I could speak about other ones too, if it made more sense, but right now I'll just stay in the present. When I think about the things that have transpired and the lack of transparency and justice around the racist, overtly racist, continuingly racist practices that have happened in my institution, and no transparency, no justice, no accountability, know nothing about what happened after that. And then you send me something saying we get Juneteenth off, like delete. I'm not reading this. I'm not reading those emails. And so I feel like it's that kind of thing, right? I mean, just being honest, like it's those kind of moments of like performative allyship, performative justice, whatever you want to call it. That's so, I don't know. It angers me. It also makes me sad because I think if you don't know, it's like you could sit at that table and look at that and feel like, oh yes, we getting all these emails and there's all these statements and we're doing all the things. But when you know that there are other situations that are also happening in parallel to those statements, in parallel to the days off, it's really hard to believe it's real and true. And so those are my red flags, especially in systems. If I'm on a PD and a teacher says something like really sideways about arguing, I won't say more because I don't want to. I feel this, it's probably not professional for me to reveal this, but it just when someone makes a statement about how they've dehumanized a child and the administrator is on the call and doesn't say anything, and you feel comfortable to talk about ways that you have treated children in ways that no one should be treated, and your administration doesn't say anything, but yet your district is paying me to come in and talk. Like those things are contradictions and they're all red flags. Like how can you be really rooted in equity when the people who should be speaking out first there's no fear of consequence. There's no concern that I can do this to a child and say it. It's like jumping on your bed. If I was a child, jumping on your bed or jumping on someone else's furniture and having your mom walk in, that tells you what happens at their house, right? If you at somebody else's house jumping on the couch and your parent walks in and you don't even hop off, or their parent walks in and you don't even hop off the couch. I'm not saying I didn't do it as a child. I'm just saying I knew to stop jumping when someone walked in.
That's right.
If I kept jumping, that means I don't care. I am immune to what will happen if someone sees me jumping on the couch. Those experiences to me are red flags.
Let me take some time to elevate Zakia Jackson's question here. How have you advised people who are grieving that some tables aren't for us? And you know what that's about. People who have really wanted to believe in certain tables, especially.
Yeah, I sometimes am in that space too. It is very hard. And I think for me, just knowing what's important to you, being really clear about what your intentions are. For me, journaling has helped. Having conversations with other faculty and other students and other teachers who have felt that sting. Sometimes it comes from having conversations from people who have watched something happen at the table and felt icky also. And then like you're trying to figure out how to process what you've experienced. So being able to find people that you can process with, you don't even have to name who was at the table, but you were there and your spidey senses were tingling, right? Like you were there and you knew something about this is just not feeling right. How do you honor the voice inside of you and who you are and really what your intentions have been from the beginning, to shift, to find another table. And sometimes, you'll see me at these conferences all like, just chilling on my own, walking through, shout out to folks as I'm moving through them. But it's not always about needing to be at the table either. Sometimes there's work you just have to do on your own. You don't always have to be at those tables. And I think that is a very freeing feeling as well.
Beautiful people. It is 11:50. I want to thank and, honor Dr. Deidre Price Dennis. Please clap it up in the chat. Thank you for
so much.
Deidre, you're the greatest. We have some really powerful work to do and all that other good stuff. Everyone, I would love for y'all to also, buy all the books, get all the things. Don't go out there telling people that you don't know who Deidre Price Dennis is, because now elevate the message. Be out there, like be for real about it. All right. So we're gonna elevate her work as we can, much as we can, and we got you. Thank you so much for coming through.
Thank y'all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Take care, y'all.